The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Sunset Manor Nursing Home in Portland, Oregon, creating a melancholic rhythm that seemed to echo through the sterile hallways. Clara Vidal pulled her coat tighter as she walked past rows of elderly residents, some staring blankly at flickering television screens, others lost in conversations with memories only they could see. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the faint aroma of institutional coffee, created an atmosphere that Clara had grown accustomed to in her line of work, places where stories came to die unless someone cared enough to listen. Ms. Vidal, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, approached her. "I'm Janet, the head nurse. Thank you for coming so quickly." Clara shook the woman's hand, noting the exhaustion in her eyes. "Of course. On the phone, you mentioned something about Sister Margaret's belongings." Janet nodded, leading Clara down a narrow corridor lined with motivational posters that felt tragically out of place. "Sister Margaret passed 3 days ago. 92, lived here for the past 8 years, rarely spoke to anyone, kept to herself mostly. When we were clearing out her room, we found, well, you'll see." They stopped outside room 247. The door stood ajar, revealing a sparse space that looked like it had been stripped of any personality. A single bed, a wooden cross on the wall, and a small dresser were all that remained of someone's final years. "She wasn't actually a nun anymore," Janet explained, opening the dresser's bottom drawer. "Left the order back in the early 2000s, I think. But she always asked us to call her Sister Margaret. We respected that." She pulled out a weathered leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This was hidden under some old clothes. When I started reading, I knew I had to call someone. Your articles about cold cases, they're well known around here." Clara took the journal carefully, feeling the weight of years in her hands. The leather cover was worn smooth, and the binding was coming loose. She opened it to the first page, where neat handwriting in faded blue ink read, "Property of Sister Catherine Morrison. May God forgive what I am about to record." "Catherine Morrison," Clara whispered, the name triggering a distant memory. She looked up at Janet. "How long did you say Sister Margaret lived here?" 8 years, but here's the thing. Her real name was Catherine Morrison. She'd been using Margaret as, well, I guess you could call it an alias." The pieces began clicking together in Clara's mind. 25 years ago, she'd been a junior reporter at the Portland Tribune, covering what the media had dubbed the Vanishing Pilgrims, 2 nuns who disappeared during a walking pilgrimage between monasteries in rural Spain. The story had captivated national attention for weeks before fading into the archive of unsolved mysteries. "Jesus!" Clara breathed, flipping through pages of meticulous handwriting. "This is about the Spanish pilgrimage, the 2 nuns who disappeared in 1999. Janet's eyes widened. "You know about that? I covered it when I was starting out. Sister Catherine Morrison and Sister Elena Vasquez, they vanished without a trace during a religious pilgrimage. Massive search operation, international media coverage. Nothing was ever found." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she held the journal. "If this is authentic," she began reading aloud from the first entry. "June 15th, 2024. I can no longer carry this burden alone. Elena has been dead for 25 years, and I have lived every day since as a coward and a liar. The cancer is spreading, and I fear I will take this truth to my grave if I do not record it now. God help me. But the world deserves to know what really happened in that cursed village." The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows as Clara read on, her journalistic instincts fully awakened. The entries detailed their pilgrimage from the monastery of San Juan in northern Spain to the remote convent of Santa Maria, a journey that should have taken 4 days, but became something far more sinister. Day 3. Elena insisted we take the mountain path instead of the main road. She said it would be more spiritual, more authentic. I should have refused. I should have known that her recent behavior, the secretive phone calls, the way she avoided eye contact during prayers, meant something was wrong. But I trusted her. God forgive me, I trusted her completely. Clara's phone buzzed, interrupting her reading. A text from her editor. Still working on the Anderson kidnapping piece. Need it by 6 p.m. She glanced at the clock. 3:47 p.m. The Anderson story about a child who'd gone missing from a Portland suburb seemed insignificant compared to what she held in her hands, but she needed to be careful. False hope was a cruel thing to give to families of the missing. Janet, I need to take this with me. There are people I need to contact, records to verify. If this is legitimate, it could finally provide answers to one of the most famous disappearances of the past quarter century. Of course. Sister Margaret, Catherine. She left specific instructions that if anything happened to her, any writings should be given to a journalist. She mentioned your name specifically. This revelation sent a chill down Clara's spine. She knew who I was. She followed your work, apparently. Had clippings from some of your articles about missing persons cases. I think she'd been planning this for a long time. Clara carefully placed the journal in her bag, her mind already racing with the implications. If Catherine Morrison had survived the pilgrimage that supposedly killed both nuns, where had she been for 25 years? Why had she assumed a false identity? And most importantly, what had really happened to Sister Elena Vasquez? As she prepared to leave, Clara noticed a small piece of paper that had fallen from the journal's pages. She picked it up and read the single line written in the same careful handwriting. The truth is buried in San Miguel de Nowhere. Elena knew, and they couldn't let her leave. Outside, the Portland evening was settling into that grey twilight that made the city feel like it existed in perpetual autumn. Clara sat in her car, rain drumming on the roof, and opened the journal again. The entries became increasingly fragmented as they progressed, revealing a story of growing paranoia, hidden agendas, and a small Spanish village where nothing was as innocent as it appeared. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her editor's number, but Clara let it go to voicemail. The Anderson kidnapping could wait. She had just been handed the key to a mystery that had haunted her for over 2 decades, and she wasn't about to let the trail go cold again. As she drove through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was probably just the intensity of reading Catherine's paranoid writings, but the journal had mentioned that same feeling, the certainty that eyes were always watching, that secrets were worth killing for. She made a mental note to contact the Spanish authorities first thing in the morning, but she knew that after 25 years, official channels would be slow and skeptical. If she wanted real answers, she'd have to dig deeper, follow the path that Catherine Morrison had been too afraid to reveal until her final days. The journal held secrets that someone had been willing to kill for. Now, Clara had to decide if she was brave enough to uncover them. 3 weeks later, Clara stood at the edge of San Miguel de Cardedo, a village so small it barely registered on modern GPS systems. The October sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and something else, something that reminded her of Catherine's final diary entries about places where the very stones hold secrets. The flight to Madrid, followed by a grueling drive through the mountains of northern Spain, had given Clara plenty of time to study every page of Catherine's journal. The entries grew more disturbing as the pilgrimage progressed, revealing a woman slowly realizing she'd walked into a trap. Day 4. We should have reached Santa Maria by now, but Elena convinced me we needed to stop in this village for supplies. The locals stare at us strangely, and when I asked about continuing our journey, the innkeeper just smiled and said, "Sisters don't leave San Miguel." I thought it was a language barrier. Now I'm not so sure. Clara had contacted Detective Inspector Miguel Herrera of the Guardia Civil, the officer who'd originally investigated the nuns' disappearance. Now retired and living in nearby Oviedo, he'd agreed to meet her in the village, though his voice on the phone carried a warning. "Some stones are better left unturned, Señorita Vidal." She found him waiting outside the village's only inn, a weathered building that looked unchanged since medieval times. Herrera was a compact man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. He greeted her with professional courtesy, but maintained the distance of someone who'd learned not to trust easy answers. "You've read the journal," he said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. "What do you make of it?" Either Catherine Morrison was suffering from severe paranoia, or this village was hiding something 25 years ago that it's still hiding today. Clara gestured toward the inn. "According to her entries, this is where everything went wrong." Herrera nodded grimly. "I interviewed everyone here in 1999, innkeeper, priest, mayor. All of them claimed the nuns never stopped in San Miguel, said they would have remembered 2 American religious women." He took a long drag. "But there were things that didn't add up. Small things." "Like what?" "The innkeeper's wife kept changing her story about what she was doing the day the nuns supposedly passed through. The priest had fresh concrete poured behind the church that same week, said it was scheduled maintenance, but no permits had been filed, and the mayor—" Herrera's voice trailed off. "What about the mayor? Joaquin Mendoza. Charming man, very helpful during the investigation, too helpful if you know what I mean. Always had an explanation ready, always knew exactly where everyone was on what day. People like that make me nervous." They entered the inn, where the smell of roasted lamb and old wood created an atmosphere that felt frozen in time. The innkeeper, a heavy-set woman with suspicious eyes, approached them with forced hospitality. "Buenas tardes," she said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You are the American journalist, yes? People have been talking about your visit." Clara introduced herself in careful Spanish, watching the woman's reaction. "I'm researching the pilgrimage route that 2 nuns took in 1999. I believe they may have stopped here." The innkeeper's face hardened. No nuns came here. I would remember." "This is Carmen Ruiz," Herrera explained quietly to Clara. "She was married to the innkeeper in 1999. He died 5 years ago, and she took over the business." Clara pulled out a photograph, one she'd found in Catherine's belongings at the nursing home. It showed Catherine and Elena standing outside what was unmistakably this inn, smiling in their habits with walking sticks in hand. Carmen's face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "From Sister Catherine Morrison." "She survived, Carmen. She lived for 25 more years, and before she died, she wrote down everything that happened in your village." The photograph seemed to drain all the fight out of the older woman. She sank into a nearby chair, her hands shaking. "I told them it would come back. I told Joaquin that secrets like this don't stay buried forever." "What secrets?" Clara pressed gently. Carmen looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to materialize from the shadows. "The American sister, the dark-haired one, Elena. She wasn't just passing through. She'd been here before, months earlier. She came looking for her brother." This revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. Catherine's journal had mentioned Elena's secretive behavior, but never anything about a brother. Her brother lived here? Not lived. He'd come here to hide. Roberto Vasquez. He was running from something in America. Bad people, drug debts, I don't know. Elena had been sending him money, helping him disappear. But then... Carmen's voice broke. "Then what happened? He got involved with the wrong people here too. Started working for them, moving things through the mountains. Elena came that first time to take him home, but he refused, said he was in too deep." Carmen wiped her eyes with a dish towel. "When she came back with the other sister, Roberto was already dead, had been for weeks." The pieces of Catherine's paranoid writings suddenly made perfect sense. Eleanor hadn't been leading them on a spiritual detour. She'd been trying to recover her brother's body, or at least learn the truth about his death. "Who killed Roberto?" Clara asked. Carmen's eyes darted toward the window. "The same people who made sure neither sister left this village alive." At that moment, the inn's door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered. Despite being in his 70s, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Clara didn't need an introduction to know this was Joaquin Mendoza. "Carmen," he said, with practiced warmth, "I heard we had visitors asking about old stories." Herrera stubbed out his cigarette. "Joaquin, still playing the helpful public servant, I see." "Inspector Herrera, what a pleasant surprise. And you must be the American journalist." Mendoza's English was perfect, with just a hint of accent. "I understand you're writing about our beautiful pilgrimage routes." "I'm writing about what happened to two nuns who disappeared," Clara said directly, "and according to this journal, they died in your village." Mendoza's composure never wavered. "Journals can be unreliable, especially from someone who spent her final years in a facility for the mentally unwell. Catherine Morrison wasn't mentally ill. She was traumatized by watching her friend die and spending 25 years afraid that the same people would find her. If such a dramatic event had occurred in my village, don't you think the authorities would have found evidence?" Inspector Herrera conducted a very thorough investigation. Herrera's jaw tightened. "As thorough as I was allowed to make it." This comment hung in the air like a challenge. Mendoza's facade cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "some stories are better left in the past. San Miguel is a peaceful place now. We've worked hard to build a reputation for hospitality and safety. Wild accusations about decades-old crimes could be damaging." Clara felt the same chill that Catherine must have experienced, the realization that she was no longer just investigating a story, but walking into the same web that had trapped two women 25 years ago. "I'm not making accusations," she said, though her voice betrayed her growing unease. "I'm seeking the truth. Truth is a luxury, Miss Vidal. Sometimes the cost is higher than people are willing to pay." As if summoned by his words, two younger men entered the inn. They didn't speak, but their presence changed the atmosphere in the room dramatically. Carmen immediately busied herself behind the bar, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Herrera stood up slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. Even retired old habits died hard. "We should go," he said quietly to Clara. "We've learned enough for today." But Clara wasn't ready to leave. Catherine's journal had led her here for a reason, and she could feel the truth lurking just beneath the surface of the village's polite facade. "One more question," she said to Mendoza. "Where exactly did you pour that concrete behind the church in October 1999? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mendoza's helpful smile disappeared entirely. "I think, Miss Vidal, that you should be very careful about the questions you ask. San Miguel is a small place, but the mountains are vast. People get lost in them all the time." As they left the inn, Clara's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally being close to the truth. Catherine's journal had been right about everything so far. If her final entries were also accurate, then somewhere in this village lay the answers to a 25-year-old mystery. But as they walked through the narrow streets, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from behind every shuttered window. The village that had swallowed two nuns without a trace was still hungry, and she was walking directly into its mouth. The truth was here, buried beneath decades of silence and complicity. The question was whether Clara would live long enough to dig it up.